Hello and welcome to the video. If this is your first time here, my name is Mike. If you've been here before, my name is still Mike, but you would have known that already. This week we're going to be covering heat loss detection with a thermal imaging camera. Now this is going to be a long video, so I'll try to leave chapter markers in the description so you can skip to the part that interests you the most. Now before we start, we need to cover a few basic concepts so that everyone can understand what we're talking about. Some of you may already know about the three types of heat transfer: convection, conduction, and radiation. Now, if you don't, imagine that you want to roast a marshmallow to make a delicious s'more. You stick the marshmallow onto a piece of wire and hold it over your bed of coals. The hot air rising from that bed of coals is convection. This is the heat which roasts your marshmallow. As some time goes by, you'll notice the handle of your wire starting to warm up. This is heat energy being conducted from the heated end of your wire to the cool end of your wire through a highly conductive material. This is heat transfer by conduction. And finally, as you get closer to the fire, you're not actually touching the fire or hot coals, but you can feel the heat radiating onto your skin. This illustrates the radiative heat transfer process. One thing that you must understand is that heat always flows from hot to cold. One more thing before we get into the video. Since I live in Canada, all temperatures I mention are measured in degrees Celsius. So now that we have those major definitions out of the way, let's get into the meat of this video. Let's say that you applied for and received a loan from the Canadian government to improve the efficiency of your home, or you saved up some money to do the same. Where do you put that money to get the best return on your investment? Now personally, I wouldn't ask your contractor. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot, will tell you the easiest and most profitable thing for them. I'm also not saying you need to hire a thermographer to inspect your home to get the best return. There are cheap thermal cameras out there that can show you some drafts and heat loss. There are a couple of manufacturers that make a thermal imaging camera you can attach to your phone, and they're only a couple $100. There are even cell phones now with built-in thermal imaging cameras. And those cell phones are dropping in price year after year. However, you will get a much better report from a trained thermographer than grabbing a cheap thermal imaging camera and doing it yourself. Either way you decide to go, let's have a look at some of the things that either you or your thermographer of choice should be looking for. The first and usually most apparent item is drafts. These typically show up around wall penetrations, windows, doors, and outlets on outside walls. Here's an image of a typical outlet on an outside wall. If you look to the right-hand side of the outlet, you can clearly see the irregular pattern that indicates a draft coming in. You can also notice that the screws holding the cover on the plate are cooler than the rest of the wall, but we'll look closer at that kind of thing later in this video. Here is a door that is in desperate need of replacement, or at the very least repair. You're able to see the cold air rushing in through the door sweep. Of course, in a case this bad, you won't actually need a thermal imaging camera to notice this draft. You can feel the cold air on your feet when you get close to this door. We are seeing convection with these drafts in these images. These problems are typically relatively easy to fix. There are foam gaskets you can add behind your outlets. Spray foam around your windows and doors will eliminate some of the drafts. And, of course, replacing weather stripping regularly will help seal doors and windows against drafts. Thermal bridging is also a concern for typical North American houses. This is the phenomenon where heat will transfer through the studs in the exterior walls of a home. If you look at this image, you can clearly see the studs in the wall. Now, keep in mind, this was not an extreme temperature day. The outside temperature was only -10, and the interior temperature was typical room temperature, about 20 degrees. Yet, you can clearly see the studs, almost like I pulled the drywall off the walls. In this image, you can even clearly see the drywall screws. This problem is next to impossible to solve. There are easy ways to make it better, such as insulated siding or adding a layer of insulation behind the siding. You can also build a party wall, which allows you to weave the insulation between studs, creating a barrier between the outside and the inside. Of course, this option will more than double the cost of exterior walls. This heat transfer is conduction and is by far the hardest to control. Another issue that lots of people don't think of is foundation walls. Here you can see what I am presuming is a completely uninsulated foundation. It's obviously far warmer than the rest of the house, and this would be a massive heat loss for the homeowner. Now, remember that outlet from earlier in the video? The screws show conduction. As far as I know, there's no way to fix this issue completely. However, this would be a case of diminishing returns. The amount of heat loss from these screws is negligible at worst. And if you have gotten to the point of worrying about this, you can probably sit back and relax knowing that your home is one of the most energy efficient homes in the world. Windows are a large source of radiant heat loss. Glass is somewhat of an insulator as far as convection and conduction. However, thermal radiation can pass through glass with little loss of power. If you look at a typical single pane window, it has almost no effect on thermal radiation. Just think of how hot the interior of your car gets on a sunny day. That is thermal radiation. The advent of low E windows has helped homeowners improve the thermal envelope of their homes. Typical double pane windows can make a huge difference on the cost of heating or cooling your home. Take a look at these two images. One is a home with single pane windows, while the neighboring home has newer double pane windows installed. You can clearly see a difference in the heat transfer, and it could be even more pronounced if the double pane windows were covered with a reflective film. Most homeowners want to be able to see out of the windows they paid so much for. Okay, now that I've rambled on for several minutes about this topic, I'll try and wrap this up. If you're looking to improve the thermal properties of your home or business, you should either buy a small thermal imaging camera or hire someone with one to take several pictures of the entire envelope of your building. Then speak with your contractor to make the necessary upgrades. All that remains now is for me to remind you to subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to share this video with friends or family members who you think may be able to gain some information. Like the video if you did. Feel free to add a comment if you want some more information. And remember, you can follow Gradient Imaging on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok if you so desire. But until next week, when we will be out exploring again, bye-bye.